Good afternoon. I'm Leonard Baines, Dean of the University of Houston Law Center. I want to welcome you to the CLE called Lawyers Who Lead, Ethics, Influence, and Impact. The University of Houston Law Center is a top-tier law school with 4 programs in the top 15 as ranked by U.S. News & World Report, our part-time program, our health law program, intellectual property program, and our legal writing program. Our students are fabulous, as well as our faculty, and I'm proud to be dean of this institution for 11 years. I'm now the longest-serving law dean in the state of Texas. So the CLE, like many others that we do, provide a wealth of information on important topics. We try to provide light but not heat. And this topic is called Lawyers Who Lead, Ethics, Influence, and Impact. No other profession accounts for more leaders in every aspect of our society. Lawyers comprise less than 1/2 of 1% of the population, but have an incredible influence and impact on decisions made every day. We, of course, lead by leading and serving as general counsel, partners in law firms, or just doing the day-to-day work of a lawyer by prosecuting cases and bringing disparate parties to consensus. Every aspect of what lawyers are called upon to do in the representation of clients is leadership, influencing others to accomplish a need and hopefully achieve a greater good. Approximately 26 lawyers have served as President of the United States. Throughout history, lawyers such as Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and FDR led our country in very important aspects and junctures in time. In Texas, our governor and 2 U.S. senators are lawyers. A significant number of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are lawyers, as well as heads of nonprofits and other political leaders. Our effective leadership through our many roles and responsibilities advance these causes and enhance these enterprises. Lawyers put themselves in position to lead by strategizing, persuading, commanding the room, whether the room is a boardroom, courtroom, or public opinion. Alexa de Tocqueville said that lawyers are problem solvers, and as such, had a separate station in society, sort of like American aristocracy, with a duty to protect our democracy. However, our influence appears to be waning. Many people have a bad rep on lawyers. Lawyers have seen over the past few years lawyers getting themselves in trouble with ethical dilemmas and other issues that may make members of the public lose respect for lawyers. There needs to be more lawyers who are great leaders, and many law schools say in their mission statement that is what they're trying to do. We expect our law graduates to be leaders and act as leaders in our community, but intentional leadership sometimes is not par for the course. So this CLE is an attempt to discuss and address these issues, and the University of Houston Law Center has 2 folks on this panel who are noted for their lawyers and leaders scholarship and activity and influence. And we need more lawyers, and we need more law professors, and we need more of everyone to figure out and make sure that we have effective leadership in our profession as well as in many other professions. Because effective leadership begins with a person's values, purposes, identity, and leads to the influencing and empowering of others to act and accomplish more together than separately. So thank you. I'd first like to introduce our first panelist. Andrew Gratz is the creator and professor of Lawyers as Leaders and founder of the Initiative on Lawyers as Leaders at the University of Houston Law Center. He's guided legal teams through complex challenges facing global corporations, including multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, bankruptcy restructuring, key stakes in commercial negotiations, regulatory matters, and crisis management. He began his career at 2 big firms, Foley Lardner and Baker Botts. He's a recipient of the Texas General Counsel Forum's Magna Stella Award for Best Senior Managing Counsel, Large Legal Department, and the Houston Corporate Counsel Award for Senior Counsel of the Year, Large Legal Department. He founded Lawyers as Leaders, which is a course dedicated to equipping legal professionals with critical legal skills, which he teaches at University of Houston Law Center. Let's welcome Andrew Gratz to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. I also want to obviously thank the University of Houston Law Center for hosting this important discussion. Let me share my slides. So, to start this discussion, I thought, you know what, we're in a law school setting. It would be only appropriate to begin with some Q&A. Actually, just some Q. So for those of you on the call, for those of you listening, and we have a very good turnout today, and I want to thank everyone for calling in and participating. I would like each of you to write down the name of the best leader in your practice group, team, or legal department. Give you a second to do that. Now, I would like you to write down the best leader in your firm or company. Now, please write down the best leader that you know. Did any of you write down your name? If the answer is no, I'm hopeful in the next 2 hours and even beyond this discussion, you will start thinking about how do I get from where I am today to being the best, not the best, the most effective leader that you know and that others know. How do you build that bridge to being a truly effective leader? But for right now, I want you to put that aside and answer another question. Do lawyers make good leaders? I'll be honest, this question has been troubling me now for a few years. It's one of the reasons I started the initiative on lawyers as leaders and why I have dived into this type of scholarship. Because it troubles me that while I've had lots of managers and bosses who are great legal leaders, I've had far more that were not. And while I'm hopeful you have not had a similar experience, after talking to colleagues and friends over the years, I have found a common theme, and that theme is lawyers typically do not make good leaders. And I think there are a few reasons for that. Because we are not prepared to lead. And it starts at the very beginning. So I want all of you on the call to think back about your first semester in law school. You're very excited, you're very eager, you've worked really hard to get that point in your academic career. And a message is conveyed to you, whether explicitly or implicitly. Look to your left, look to your right. One of you will not be here in a few years. Think about how you internalize that. That means for me to succeed, the person next to me has to fail. For the person next to me to succeed, I have to fail. Then fast forward a few weeks into that first semester of law school, where the professor may call on you. Not a team, not a group, just you. It is you against the professor. It is the professor asking you questions where you need to anticipate what he or she may ask next. And frankly, some may try to get you into a corner. Think about that adversarial relationship. Then fast forward a few months to that first exam, and you know there's a curve. And because of that curve, for you to get an A, the person next to you might have to get a C. For the person next to you to get an A, you might have to get a C. It is a zero-sum game. Then fast forward to your first job. You're excited, you're eager, you have worked incredibly hard to get to that position. And you are told, well, there's only so much work to go around. And so it's either you're going to get those hours, it's either you're going to get to work on that the company litigation or that multi-billion-dollar transaction, or the person next door to you. You are rewarded and encouraged to only think about yourself and to only worry about you succeeding. Yet, maybe 4, 5, 6 years into your career, someone will step into your office and ask you to lead a team. You're going to be that lead associate who's managing a major transaction. You're going to be that lead associate who's managing a litigation matter. So overnight, when you have spent 6, 7, 8 years being trained to only think about yourself, you're asked to lead a team, to worry about others, to no longer view setting goals and accomplishing goals as a zero-sum game. Think how jarring that is. And maybe some of you have experienced that, because to be in a profession where you're trained and encouraged to only think about yourself, and then one day flip the switch and think about others, is very challenging. And it's no wonder that many lawyers are not the best or most effective leaders they can be. There are other challenges there are other leadership challenges unique to lawyers. Risk aversion. We're trained to look at all sides, on the one hand, on the other hand. Well, if you're constantly trained to see all sides and to mitigate risk wherever you find it, it's hard to take bold action. It's hard to be an effective leader. There's also that adversarial mindset we talked about a few minutes ago. It is me against you. It is me against the person next to me. It is me against anyone across the conference room table or on the other side of that mediation table. Well, it's hard to collaborate when you're constantly trained to look at the other side as your enemy. And then, of course, we're in a high-stress profession. Billable hours, get the job done. It's hard to think about the welfare of your team when maybe you're not 100% where you need to be at that moment in time, because of the stress, because of the pressure getting to you. And what I would propose to all of you is, for the long-term success of your career, to be an effective legal leader, you need to shift from problem solving to vision setting and become and practice effective leadership. So in my view, there are 2 steps to becoming an effective leader. The first step is leadership of self. Who are you? Do you know your strengths? Do you know what stresses you out? And more importantly, do you know your blind spots? Do you know when you'll need the assistance of somebody else to actually accomplish an important goal? The second step is leadership with others. Do you work well with others? Are you a team player? Are you looked at as a trusted member of any organization? And when the problems hit the fan, do they look to you to guide them to that next step? And if the answer is no on either of these, that's okay. Because one of the things we're going to be discussing in the next couple hours is you're not born as a leader. Leadership, like anything else, like any other strength, comes with practice, comes with perseverance, and comes with reps. The more reps you do, the more leadership tactics and attributes and traits you practice, the better leader you're going to be. So let's talk about leadership of self. The first person you need to lead is the person in the mirror. If you are not self-aware, if you are not aware, as I said, of your strengths and also your blind spots, if you are not self-disciplined and accountable to yourself, then I don't know how you can lead others. If you promise yourself, I'm going to be at that gym 6 a.m. tomorrow, and you're not, what's your credibility to yourself? If you are not credible, if you're not honest, if you're not self-aware about who you are and how you hold yourself and how you present yourself to others, then leading others is going to be a significant challenge. The first step is leading who you are and being accountable to you. Also, after you have led and understand who you are, do you practice leadership? And if I say one thing that you take away from this presentation, your ability to lead is not dictated by the org chart. I don't care if you have 50 direct reports or 0. Leadership does not require a title. It does not require a fancy business card. It is how you conduct yourself and how you treat others and how you engage in your professional setting, in your personal setting, in your house of worship. Lead from where you are. It does not matter if the org chart says you're a leader. It matters if the people around you say that you're a leader. To do that, you have to develop certain influence skills. And it comes down to what we all learned in kindergarten. Treat others as you want to be treated. If you want people to listen to you, you've got to listen to them. If you want people to work with you and to understand your idiosyncrasies and your blind spots, then you have to do the same for them. Leadership at its core is building relationships. And how you build relationship is by building trust, credibility, empathy, and through those actions, you're able to persuade, because no one can be persuaded by somebody they don't trust. I don't care where they are in the org chart. I don't care what title they have. People need to learn how to trust you. And the only way that you build that trusting relationship is, no surprise, building the relationship. How you build relationships is, one, treating others with respect and dignity, but also demonstrating to others that you embrace responsibility and accountability. I don't know any effective leader that doesn't own their mistakes or own their responsibilities. If something lands on your desk, your team needs to know you've got it. You've got the ball. You're going to run with it. And if you say you're going to do something, it will get done. And if it doesn't get done, you're going to make people aware of why, and you're going to take accountability for that mistake. You're not going to blame others. You're not going to look to him or her to shift blame. Poor leaders shift blame. Failed leaders shift blame. To be an effective leader, you need to demonstrate you've got not only the ownership of the action, but the responsibility. In all of that, you also have to cultivate humility. You are not going to be the only person in the room around the conference room table that understands the right way to do something. Each member of your team is going to bring something different to that project and a different approach to accomplishing that goal. Are you listening to them? Are you understanding and open to hearing them out? You may not always agree with them. They may not always agree with you. But are you showing the humility to understand that you don't know it all? And in fact, there's more than one way to get the goal each of you is trying to achieve. Shifting from leadership of self to leadership with others. As I said a few minutes ago, and as I hope you're internalizing, the org chart does not dictate whether or not you're a leader. Your ability to lead dictates whether or not you're an effective leader. And with that, an effective leader understands how to influence his or her team. And as I said a few minutes ago, they build that influence through relationships, trust, and credibility. The org chart does not build it. And in fact, if you're depending on the org chart to earn that respect and to command that leadership, it will be fleeting. And eventually the team will lose its trust in you, and where you are in the org chart will become irrelevant. The goal is to accomplish the goal. The goal is to progress the team, and you do that through building relationships. And as I said a few minutes ago, You build the relationships by earning trust. If someone asks you to do something, does it get done? Does it get done on time? Do you consistently produce good work? Are you honest in your dealings, even with someone up on the other side of that conference room table? Are you honest with opposing counsel? Do you demonstrate ethics? And we're going to talk a lot more about ethics in a few minutes. But are you an ethical leader? There are lots of lawyers in Houston. There are lots of lawyers in the United States. But at the end of the day, we're a pretty small community. And you're going to cross paths with a lot of the same people over the course of your career. When you call somebody, are they happy to see you're calling them, or do they put you straight to voicemail? Well, I would propose that whether or not somebody is happy to talk to you demonstrates whether or not you're honest, consistent, and reliable. Politics. Unfortunately, whether you're in a nonprofit, a law firm, a corporation, or in any setting, there's always going to be organizational politics. Do you understand the players? Do you understand the person who talks a lot but gets nothing done? Do you understand the silent person who sits in the back but has an amazing influence over their organization? Do you understand each person's role and what they bring and frankly do not bring to the table? True leadership, true leaders understand those dynamics. And to be effective, to understand how to move an organization from point A to point B, you have to understand the politics of your team, your department, and frankly, the company. Being a team player. You know, I talked a few minutes ago about how we as lawyers are trained from day one to be solo. And then 3-4 years down the road, flip overnight to become team leaders. Well, I don't care where you are in your career, at some point, you're going to be asked to lead a team. It could be working with a team of paralegals. It could be working with a team of the most highly skilled lawyers in the country or highly skilled experts. You're going to be asked to work with a team. If you have not practiced your ability to be a team player, when you're tapped to lead, it is going to be an uphill battle and a steep learning curve. Work on becoming a positive team player and a positive force. And you can do that in any setting, whether it's at home, you know, working with your spouse or your kids to get something done, whether it's in the office, working with your colleagues to finish that goal on time, whether it's in your house of worship, whether it's law school, if you're a student. There's numerous opportunities to be a team player. Seize on those opportunities. The more you can demonstrate you're a good team player, the more you demonstrate this person is ready to lead. Lead with purpose. One of the things I always tell my team is if you don't understand the why, you're not going to understand the how. How am I supposed to accomplish a goal if I don't even know what the goal is? If I don't understand what I'm here to do? Understand why you're a member of the team you're on. Understand the purpose of your legal department. Understand the purpose of the initiative you're working on. Find the meaning in the work you do. If you are just showing up, checking boxes, going home, and not thinking about the grand purpose in your work and why you need to do what you need to do, one, you're probably not very inspired to be there. And more importantly, you're probably not inspiring others. Effective leaders know how to inspire. Understand why you're doing the work you're doing, and that will be contagious. So, we started off this conversation with what are you the most effective leader on your team, in your organization that you know? Well, as good lawyers, you probably asked, or should have been asking, What makes an effective leader? What type of leader am I? How can I be a more effective leader? And I would propose to all of you that is a question you should not only ask today, throughout this presentation, but throughout your career. The leader you are today will be much different than the leader you are 5 years from now, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And that's a positive thing. The more you lead, the more you work with others, the more challenges you face and overcome, the more effective leader you can be. It all comes down to the reps. And if you are at the beginning of your professional journey and you're just, that entry level associate or that entry level corporate counsel or that entry level fill in the title, fill in the blank, that does not mean you cannot go into work tomorrow and be an effective leader. Understand what the organization requires from you and understand what you require from yourself. Because at the end of the day, leadership is about mentoring, leadership is about guiding, leadership is about letting others grow and sometimes grow beyond you. And that is the key that I have found in my professional journey, and I would encourage you guys to think of as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gratz. That was great. It's all about the reps. It's all about the reps. We'll get back to that. So next, I'd like to introduce my other colleague, Professor Renee Knocke Jefferson. She's professor of law and the Joanne and Larry Doherty Chair in Legal Ethics at the University of Houston Law Center. Professor Jefferson is an award-winning scholar and educator known for expertise in legal and judicial ethics. She's author of 5 books and more than 30 academic articles. Her research is published in top journals such as the Michigan Law Review, the Yale Law Journal Forum. She's been cited in court proceedings and major media outlets such as New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post. She regularly is called upon as an expert witness, including testimony before the U.S. Congress and 2 appearances before the Texas Supreme Court of Special Review, successfully defending judges. She's also served as elected member of the American Bar Association's Council for the Section on Legal Education and Admission to the Bar, and she's currently sits on the board of directors of the International Association of Legal Ethics. She's a past chair of the Association of American Law Schools Section on Professional Responsibility, and she's an elected member of the American Law Institute, which is one of the most prestigious organizations of judges, lawyers, and law professors in the nation. Let's welcome Professor Renee Knocke Jefferson. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean Baines, for that amazing welcome. And I also just want to acknowledge, since we're talking about leadership today, how fortunate we are at the University of Houston Law Center to be led by such an extraordinary dean. And his dedication to leadership and mentorship is certainly exemplified by the fact that he's devoted the CLE to such an important topic. And I'm going to add a couple of questions to the list that Andrew left us with. And it really picks up on his closing remarks. One question for you is, what will your legacy be as a leader? And another question is, how do we cultivate the next generation of lawyers as leaders? And I'd like to propose that the answer to the first question, what will your legacy be, is tied directly to the second of cultivating that next generation of lawyers as leaders. So now let me take a moment to share my slides. And hopefully you're all seeing them. I think you are. Excellent. All right. So I want to focus on not just how to be a good leader, which I really appreciated that Andrew was directing us there, but also what will your legacy be as a leader? And I also want to remind all of us how our obligations as leaders are really, it's tied to professional conduct rules and legal ethics. And so my focus today is really going to be on the way that lawyers influence all of public life. We're going to explore ethical stewardship in leadership, and in particular, mentoring the next generation, building lasting legacies, and preparing future generations to uphold public trust. To me, being a leader as a lawyer is not just focused on our work for our clients, but it is really grounded and rooted in our role as a public citizen. And we see this as foundational in the professional conduct rules that guide us, whether you are looking at the American Bar Association's model rules or our own Texas rules. And so let me show you from the preamble. In the Texas Disciplinary Rules of Professional Conduct, Provision 5 talks about the role of a lawyer as a public citizen. A lawyer should seek improvement of the law, the administration of justice, and the quality of service rendered by the legal profession. The ABA model rules mirrors this and also includes access to the legal system. I see this as a calling for every lawyer to serve as a leader, not just in how they represent clients, but importantly, how they show up in their community and in public life. The ABA model rules take this obligation just a little bit further in adding an additional line. A lawyer should further the public's understanding of and confidence in the rule of law and the justice system, because legal institutions in a constitutional democracy depend on popular participation and support to maintain their authority. In other words, we need lawyers out leading in their community in order to make sure the public has full confidence and trust in our legal system and in our system of government. That's quite a heavy burden that we step into when we become members of the profession. And it's why it's so important to have the tools Andrew talked about, but also to understand our professional obligations. Now, before I say more about the idea of leadership as ethical stewardship, I want to just share a little bit about my own research, which grounds and informs my remarks today. And to the extent anything I mention is interesting to you and you want to learn more, these are some resources where you can read more about the work I've done. My focus on leadership looks to the legal profession's past, to our history. It also explores not just how to be a good lawyer, but using the skills of a lawyer, how can we reshape structures and pipelines to allow individuals who are qualified and prepared to lead to move into those roles. And also, I take a futuristic look, exploring where their profession is going, looking out on the horizon and thinking about how lawyers should lead. So in my work on the history of the profession, I have focused in particular on leaders who went unrecognized. In my book, Shortlisted, I document women leaders in the profession who were considered by presidents for the US Supreme Court, going back decades before the first female joined the court, Sandra Day O'Connor, in 1981. That's, of course, a story that I think most of us all of us in the profession know, and most of the public knows. But did you know that presidents going back to the 1930s were considering women for a seat on the court? A total of 9 were considered, enough to fill the whole court. And my book explores their stories, even though they didn't make it onto the Supreme Court, to be considered by a president, especially at a time where they were opening doors that had been completely closed to women. They displayed extraordinary leadership and courage. And so we can look to lessons from leaders of the past as part of how to lead, but also importantly, how to shape the structures and the pipelines for leadership. And that's really the focus of my casebook and also the seminar I teach at the University of Houston Law Center on leadership law and pipelines to power, where I focus students' attention not just on how to lead, but importantly, as lawyers, how to examine institutional structures, whether they are formal laws or policies or practices or standards that hold back individuals who are well qualified for leadership and allow them to flourish. So going to the women who were shortlisted, not only is it important to understand the untold histories of leaders before us, but that book explores an institutional structure that held women back, and it was a short list. To be selected in most leadership positions, to be sure you got to get yourself on the short list. But in those early days, for many of the women, being on the short list, it became a tool to say, oh, we'll consider women, but not going to select them this time. For some, very explicitly, President Richard Nixon was the most obvious example of that. He used his Supreme Court shortlist with 2 women on it as a way to campaign for votes for his reelection, but never intended to move them from the shortlist to the court. And so I think it's important as lawyers to examine, scrutinize, and reform both explicit barriers and, importantly, implicit barriers that still endure. And then in my book, Law Democratized, I really focus on our obligation as leaders in the law to expand access to legal services. Some 80% of the country goes without a lawyer to help them with their legal needs, including showing up in court. And so how are we as leaders structuring reforms to law and looking at tools and technology and innovation to open up access to the law for expanding public trust? So this is the research that grounds what I want to now turn to in thinking about leadership as ethical stewardship. And here I want to focus our attention on sort of 3 categories. One, democratizing access, as I just spoke about, ensuring that justice is accessible to everyone. So who's practicing law? How are the services delivered? Whose voices are heard? As leaders, can we be expanding pipelines? Also importantly, as leaders, how are we making the profession more transparent and accountable, demystifying it both for our lawyers coming through the profession in hiring, promotions, and governance, and inviting scrutiny in that way, but also transparency and accountability for the public, importantly in our lawyer discipline system, and also in the ways that lawyers engage in public life. And then the last area of focus is thinking about stewardship over ownership. We are a self-regulating profession. We sometimes are critiqued as being guardians of our profession in a way that really we should focus on being stewards. And we're temporary stewards. We're part of this profession that will endure long after our time here. And so how are we stewarding it to further the public trust and doing so as leaders? And I'd like you just to take a second to reflect on what might be a common thread that runs through each of these areas of focus. And for me, that common thread is actually one of the last ideas that Andrew mentioned in his remarks, and that's mentoring and our role as mentoring and in leadership. And I want to suggest to you that mentorship is really a professional responsibility. And while there's not an explicit professional conduct rule in the ABA model rules or the Texas rules that mandates that lawyers serve as mentors, there are a number of provisions that I think inform our obligation to mentor as leaders. And I also would like to suggest could be reformed to further buttress that obligation. And so let me just say a few words about each of those provisions. And I'll start with Rule 5.1 or 5.01 if we're talking about the Texas rules. And this is the rule that is perhaps the one that offers the closest guidance, at least on supervisory authority, although it certainly falls short of every aspect of mentorship. And just as a reminder, this is the rule that requires every partner in a law firm or every lawyer who has a supervisory role in their organization to make sure that the firm or the organization has overarching policies to ensure compliance with professional conduct rules. And then also individual lawyers as supervisors of junior attorneys. They also must make reasonable efforts to ensure that the attorney they're supervising conforms with the rules of professional conduct. So that does embrace a component of mentoring. It's certainly not every aspect, but that's one place that we see our obligation as leaders to mentor grounded in our ethics rules. One step that could go further would be explicitly including mentorship in the model rules and in the Texas rules. And here I'm thinking about something sort of similar to Model Rule 6.1 on voluntary pro bono service in the ABA model rules, which suggests that and recommends that lawyers complete 50 hours of pro bono service every year. The Texas rules have a rule that requires not resisting an appointment. And then also the Texas Bar has adopted a policy that's similar to recommending that pro bono work. And you might think, well, what good does it do if it's not mandated? And I would suggest that at a minimum, having the encouragement to do pro bono and a set number of hours as an aspiration increases awareness and participation. And having a similar sort of voluntary but encouraging obligation in the model rules related to mentorship, I believe, could fulfill a similar goal. Another place that we can draw support for and understanding of our obligation to mentor as leaders, as members of the profession, is in our duty of competence. And now both Texas Rule 1.1 or 01 and the ABA Model Rule 1.1, the duty of competence in both of those bodies of ethics rules primarily focuses on our duty of competence to our clients. But if you look into the comments, they expand in some ways our obligations. And in particular, comment 8 to both of the rules is an expansion of the understanding of duty of competence to require a lawyer to keep abreast of changes in technology and law practice. And it might be a bit of a stretch on that comment for me to say, and that also includes keeping abreast of our leadership skills and abilities to mentor. But I think it's in the spirit of it, and it's certainly a place where I would love to see an explicit comment to that point. The last place that I see as, and this is perhaps the most concrete place that I see the profession really instilling an obligation that we mentor and do so with leadership skills, is a standard that was adopted by the ABA in 2022, and it requires law schools to create programs for the development of professional identity as part of the law school curriculum. Now, those of you who have not graduated from law school recently might be really surprised to hear about that and wonder what would that look like. And so again, the standard requires that law schools provide substantial opportunities for the development of professional identity. And the guidance around that standard describes professional identity as focusing on what it means to be a lawyer and the special obligations lawyers have to clients and society. And so we can think back to the preamble provisions that I shared with you that really suggest lawyers do have a leadership obligation to society. The interpretation of the professional identity standard also focuses on the intentional exploration of values, guiding principles, and well-being practices that are foundational to successful legal practice. And those are many of the things I think that encompass what Andrew was talking about in terms of how to engage in one's own leadership development. And then the last place I will mention that we could see, and we can see mentorship as a professional responsibility further developed within our body of professional conduct rules and legal ethics, is the way best practices are adopted. And I will share that some jurisdictions, Texas has a voluntary mentorship program, but some jurisdictions actually mandate that in order to become a member, a licensed member in that jurisdiction, a lawyer has to complete a mentoring program. And this includes states like North Carolina, New Mexico, Louisiana. And typically it's a combination of continuing legal education programs, perhaps much like the one that we're all taking part in today, but also a very specific partnering of a mentor and a mentee. And it's mutually beneficial because the new lawyer gets that development, and it also is an opportunity for the lawyer who is serving as the mentor in most of these programs. They're able to fulfill their continuing legal education requirements, their ethics obligations if they have them in their CLE component. Texas has a voluntary program, not a mandatory one. I think that more of these would, again, certainly be a way, more mandatory programs would be a way to further instill our obligations to mentor as leaders. I want to turn now away from the professional conduct rules and really focus on the last two sort of areas I want to cover in my formal remarks. And one is to think just a little bit more about what I mean by ethical mentorship, and then to shift the focus to have you reflect on how you might build your own leadership legacy. And so in defining ethical mentorship, I want to just very quickly say what it's not. And certainly it's not abusive relationships. And you might be thinking, why do we even need to say that? That's so obvious. But I will tell you, in my research, I've uncovered um, numerous studies that have documented that often mentees or proteges report experiencing negative mentoring relationships. And that includes discriminatory advice, perpetuating bias, for example, under the guise of guidance, or exclusionary practices, mentoring only those that have similar backgrounds or experiences or values, or unethical modeling. So actually teaching mentees how to break rules or demonstrating unethical practices. And so, of course, this is all the kind of mentoring that ethical mentoring certainly would not be. And let me shift now to a more positive focus on what ethical mentoring is. It's certainly mutually symbiotic relationships where both the lawyer, mentor, and the individual being led or mentored, the mentee, are both learning from each other. I certainly think that's true in my role as a professor at the Law Center. I regularly learn as much from my students as they do from me, especially when I'm seeing students in their second and third year in professional responsibility. I consider them colleagues. And that is certainly an example of a mutually symbiotic relationship in mentoring and teaching. Ethical mentoring is also thinking about your own legacy building and developing your own skills as a leader, which participating in today's CLE is certainly part of that. It results in increased confidence and knowledge for your mentees, networking opportunities and connection, professional and personal growth, standing up for our mentees in challenging moments. And all of this brings me back full circle to the initial questions I posed to you to consider and how you might build your own leadership legacy. And an important way in doing that is how we bring forward the next generation of lawyers as leaders. And so as you reflect on the ways you might do that, let me give you a few suggestions. First is thinking about how we institutionalize our values. Are you making your values as a leader structural, but not personal, so that they'll survive even after you leave the leadership role, so that the leadership change can occur, but we're embedding equity and transparency and well-being into our institutions, which ties directly to the ethics of succession. Good leaders plan for continuity. They mentor competent successors. They celebrate their growth. Good leaders recognize that if they're doing their job well, they're going to be replaced. And that can be a really challenging component of understanding how to be an effective leader. But it's important and it's absolutely essential for fulfilling our obligations as lawyers in cultivating public trust and thinking about the future of the profession as stewards of the profession and really focusing on the next generation who will be leading. Finding mentors in history. So I've talked about discovering forgotten histories in biographies and autobiographies, learning from their journeys and applying wisdom. My students do this in the seminar that I teach on law, leadership, and pipelines to power. And what they tell me, and I believe this is true because it's been my own experience, is that often in reading the autobiography or a biography or a memoir of a lawyer leader, you can find out a lot more about both their failures and their successes than you might find in a formal professional relationship that you have in the workplace. And I think it's important to be able to see sort of behind the curtain, if you will, in the way that reading about leaders from the past, reading their own personal insights, can give us a more full picture of leadership challenges to learn from, and also leadership inspiration to follow and pursue. Another component in thinking about your own leadership legacy should be a focus on well-being for sustainability. having a culture that values purpose. And again, thinking about being able to change and evolve as a leader over time. And the last item I'll leave you with in contemplating your own leadership legacy is to reflect. I see reflection as leadership's quiet side. It's the ability to ask hard questions about yourself. Reflection keeps us humble. It ensures our leadership serves a purpose beyond ourselves. And so let me just wrap up now in summarizing how I view the way all of us should be reflecting on our own leadership legacy, leading, mentoring, building, reflecting, leading as stewards, not owners of the profession, mentoring with intention, building legacies that are rooted in our values, not just the individual person holding the role, teaching ethical innovation, and reflecting often while acting with courage. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kanaki Jefferson. Is great conversation, helping us understand how we can learn from others in terms of their challenges, especially those who are unique lawyers, lawyers who are the pipeline to our profession. Thank you for providing those comments. Next, I have the pleasure to introduce our third and not final, our final and third, but last but not least, panelist, Stephen Grace Jr., Dr. Stephen Grace Jr., is the president and founder of H.S. Grace and Company, a litigation support, expert testimony, and business consulting firm, serving corporate officers and directors and their counsel. The firm has offices in Houston and New York City and has provided services both nationally and internationally. Dr. Grace has more than 40 years of senior management board, Big Five national director, and university faculty member experience. He has been retained as a testifying expert in over 180 matters involving complex commercial disputes in real estate, energy, banking, finance, and insurance, and in numerous organization forms, including partnerships and nonprofit entities. He received his BS in Industrial Engineering from Lamar, his MBA from University of Chicago, and his PhD in Economics from University of Houston. He recently published a book called Corporate Governance, Understanding the Board Management Relationship, and it was published by the American Bar Association. Let's welcome Dr. Stephen Grace.
Thank you, Dean. Let me see, wait, we got this. Thank you, Dean. Is everyone hearing me okay?
Yes, it sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thanks. These are some terrific remarks that Andrew and Renee have shared, and of course the Dean framed this when opened it, and the school has done a real fine job. Let me hit at some issues. From our experience, we're a group of 30 basically retired guys and gals, been part of senior management boards and so forth, and begin to get brought in on these complex commercial litigation matters, which are fascinating in their own right, obviously deadly serious. One of the things that we see right now, and you talk about and we're very sensitive to the role of business lawyers, in our writings and things like that. We think the business lawyer plays an important role. And again, as Renee and Andrew were talking about, how you play that role and things is important. What I wanted to start with was some comments on simply where we see some of the biggest decisions to be made out there, not only in corporations, that's what we're looking at, but organizations of all sorts, because we know that all of these have the common challenge of how do you organize, how do you run these things. And that we think that at the core of this, one of the most critical things comes up in what we call figure 1 in our book. Where are the slides here? Let's see, I'm trying to move the slides. There we go. Okay. This is a critical issue in any organization any of us are part of. And that is the division of responsibilities between the challenge to govern, to oversight, and to manage. Okay? And it's done differently in different places, done differently everywhere all the time. But what are the consistent things that we see? And it's contradictory because a lot of the situations that we've seen over time, it's sort of evolved out of an Alfred Sloan type of situation. He was a great leader of GM. But this concept of, you find a good person, you put them in charge, and you turn them loose to go do these things. Well, and it's worked in that case, but oftentimes it doesn't. And what we've got here in this situation is this governance, oversight, and management. And are there any, so to speak, higher authorities that have spoken to it? And there definitely is. And that is, if you go again in our book, we talk about this because we think it's so important. In his May 2005 University of Pennsylvania Law Review article, Chief Justice Veazey, Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court at that time, said this: the board of directors will actually direct and monitor the management of the company, including strategic, business, and fundamental structural changes. Close quote. Chancellor William Chandler, who heard the famous Disney case in which we were involved, but we'll get to that later. In his opinion, he says this, open quote, Delaware law is clear that the business and affairs of a corporation are managed by or under the direction of its board of directors, close quote. The Federal Reserve Board, which literally kicked off all of the Wells Fargo directors with the problems they hit in the about 2015 going forward, they're still working their way out of, said this. They said that directors are, this open quote, directors are placed in a position of trust by the bank's shareholders, and both statutes and common law place responsibility for the affairs of a bank firmly and squarely on the board of directors. The board of directors of a bank should delegate the day-to-day routine of conducting a bank's business to its officers and employees, but the board cannot delegate its responsibility for the consequences of unsound or imprudent policies and practices, close quote. That's not the way a lot of organizations operate. And the business lawyer can end up in the middle of these things. And this is the point. We see the business lawyer is positioned to raise the issue of let's investigate this, not to step in here and say, I'm going to tell you how our organization is governance, how it's oversighted, and how it's managed, but to put the issue on the table. And that's exactly the reason that the ABA published our book. 3 of the 4 authors are not lawyers, but we're talking about, but again, from our own personal experience in the legal matters we've been involved in, this is the issue. And what the business lawyers have, and right away they said, look, this lets me put the issue in front of the board. I'm not telling the board, look, this is how you have to do it. They don't want to hear that from anybody, and certainly not, they would say, not the lawyer. Just tell us what we need to do, go away and leave us alone. But no, the lawyer can raise these issues. So my point is that a central role for the lawyer is not to feel compelled to make governance decisions, but to ensure that governance issues are being addressed. That's a big, big point that the business lawyers can play. And we think it's going to expand and reach into other areas. Not that they're there to tell the finance department that they need to do cash flows in addition to income statements, but to inquire as to whether these various issues are being done. Now, at the same time, in every organization, this is what you have to get into. Okay, whatever we are, we've got all these components within a framework of we'll set a strategy, we'll develop a plan, we'll operate control. Those, as we all know, are different in every case. But the business lawyer can make a terrific contribution by raising the issues. How does this group interface with this other group? How are we at this time addressing these issues? That's a big challenge. But the ability, they're not there with a magic wand. I've got the answer, folks. Step aside. Let me tell you how to run this thing. No, we're going to raise these issues, and we've got to address them. And can put make and or look, one of the things that we decide we need to do is we need, firms go bankrupt because they run out of cash. You may have a loss on your income statement. As long as you got cash to pay bills, you're still in business. Okay. How many firms are really tracking cash the way they need to? Income statement's really only a comparative financial statement, for example. But the point is, does the board, does management, are we generating the type of information we need to look at what's going on in our company? And what we have is, and I'm going to just cut over to this, is a very distinct gap between the way these issues are being addressed. And for example, in group one, let's talk about Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's organization. They acquire companies, as we know, are large investment positions in companies. We all know sitting here that when they come into a company, they are not coming and saying, oh, we like the ABC, whatever company, we're going to buy them or buy a big holding in it, and we'll learn what the company's all about. And we're going to take old Stephen Grace, he's a good guy, we're going to put him on the board. 6 or 8 months from now, he'll understand the company. That's not where they come from. When they get there, they understand this baby upside down and backwards to the full ability that they have. Doesn't mean they're going to always get it right, them or anybody else, but they're on top of that situation. When you look at the Walt Disney Company, I mentioned them a while ago. We were involved. There was a lawsuit that was titled "The Corporate Governance Case of the Century" early in this century, in the first decade, regarding the hiring and subsequent termination of Michael Ovitz. And when we got in there and looked at that company, going back to 1983, when 2 individuals were brought in, Michael Eisner and Frank Wells, as the CEO and the president, the great growth for Disney happened between 83 and 95. That's when they exploded. That board was loaded with people who understood Disney in every direction. They had been on the board before. Walt and Roy, as many of you know, who were the founders, they were gone. But they had 20% of the ownership was on that board. So the owners were there, but they weren't there as just investors. Roy Disney's son was a 30-year employee, head of the creative artist areas, or creative arts area. And then Ron Miller was Walt's son-in-law. He headed the 30-year veteran, he headed the movies area. You had tremendous knowledge. And what we know is those had to be great board meetings. You had real issues back and forth. There's nobody blowing smoke in there. They understood what was going on, but they didn't, and the answers weren't easy. But when they added board members, they added people who brought talents that complemented or helped address the issues that Disney was dealing with. We've written 4 articles on it. And we advise the primary D&O carrier. He wrote the preface to our book, and he talked about bringing us in, and that our work contributed to a total defense victory. The initial rulings were not good, not in Disney's favor. We did the analysis. We showed that we felt the settlement value on that case was 0, which against $140 million that the plaintiff's firm Milberg Weiss was looking for, went to trial, and Disney won 100%. All right, but what we did was get behind what happened and the business processes that they had in place. Were they perfect? No, but they addressed the issues. A business lawyer is right in the middle of that type of thing. And I could mention something all of us know. I was a project Greenway Plaza, which is the large real estate, but it's more than that, from Buffalo Speedway over to Wesleyan, north of Richmond, along the Southwest Freeway. That I was the CFO for Century Corporation. We were the managing general partner. We had two partners in that situation. General partnership was ourselves. It was Equitable, and it was Northwestern, big players. Everybody had several $100 million back when that was a lot of money. That partnership required 100% consensus on major decisions. That partnership worked. I was pretty young then. I learned a lot being there as part of that. Each of us had 3 people at these meetings. There was nobody worrying about being nice. They had issues, and we went after those issues. That was a function that worked. Now, if we come from there and we move over here, let's go on to slide 4. And we look at Boeing and Wells, let's see, I think maybe we skip one back up. The Boeing situation, where we all know they had the terrible airplane crashes, 3 on the MAX, the 737 MAX, and 346 people died on the 2 crashes. They've had other problems. They had a door fly off of a plane in flight a couple of years later, and then before that they'd had a fire on the plane. And anyhow, read our article. We're not reaching any conclusions. We didn't have to. The judge, Vice Chancellor, Zern, in her opinion, 125-page opinion, was so thoughtful, very even hand. She wasn't lashing out. It was, if I remember right, it was a motion to dismiss that she heard, and she killed Boeing. She just wiped them out in terms of they had missed safety flags with earlier situations. She said, in her opinion, the chairman lied twice to the public. We've read a lot of documents and matters we've been involved, never seen that. That is one remarkable statement. Now, that thing has gone on, as many of us know, all sorts of forms. And not too long ago, one of the federal judges, well, first of all, they had ruled that the Boeing and its starting right with the directors, could be sued for pain and suffering that these people had experienced when these planes were going down and they realized they weren't going to make it. Secondly, was recognized by a different federal judge that they could be prosecuted criminally for what happened because of the thing, without trying to go into details. That judge, in further hearings, said that he thinks that this Boeing situation is Judge O'Connor, federal judge in Texas, that this may be the worst business criminal conduct in history on that thing. Now, all right, and yet the people on both of those on that board, had extensive management experience, but did they understand the business and did they address their responsibilities? I'm not here to give you an answer on that, but we know the problem, because the problem that all of us do, the rest of their lives, they're going to be sued. One of those courts ruled that those directors have to be prepared to meet with the families of those 346 people, and they're all over the world. One of those wrecks, you may recall, crashes happened in Ethiopia, another one out in the Indian Ocean. All right, what happened? The business lawyer, and there's no easy answers to these things. The business lawyer, our point is in the middle of this, and it doesn't mean they have a magic wand again, that they have to have the responsibility to solve all this. But the raising the question of, are we addressing these things in a proper manner, becomes a major issue. Now, when we go to the next one is Wells Fargo. And you had problems that developed there. And again, of course, and basically the Fed comes in, and it's on the Federal Reserve Board website, the letters that they sent, not only to the chairman and CEO of the bank, who they removed, and the lead director, who they removed, but that they wrote to every director just basically saying you didn't do your job. If you went behind there and looked at these people, they were not without management experience. All right. What got off the track? And we're not here to render judgment on that. But this is the consequence. When you look at the contrast and we think a big issue, and the business lawyer can be a big part in this. Do we have sufficient industry knowledge on our board to develop the checks and balances and ensure the necessary transparency to make these organizations run properly on the thing? And that is one heck of a challenge, but that's the struggle. We still have this mentality of, look, I've worked all these years, I've become CEO. It's in my hands, I'll run it. Thank you very much. You know, if something goes wrong, that's not going to work. I mean, you know, and we've been involved in a lot of these, and we've been there 50% on both sides, plaintiff side and defense side. And we're on the defense side, we know we're going to be working to attempt to get behind what did happen and why it was appropriate, notwithstanding whatever the unfortunate situations were that took place in that situation. Now, so what we're saying, and this is covered in our book, and that story, and in the article, different articles that we've written. And like I say, there's another article on the Boeing situation and also an article on the Wells. And what we're talking about on the Wells situation is transitioning from this concept of tone at the top to checks and balances. Tone at the top says you're going to put all the power, all the authority in the hands of one person, and that's the ride you're going to go on. Checks and balances says, no, we've got to have, in any organization, we've got to have the necessary checks and balances. All of us in this gathering today know from situations we've been involved in, organizations of all sorts who are there, most of them to do a lot of good, but face this issue of this assignment of responsibility, defining responsibilities that have to be addressed, and then seeing how they work and have the right interrelationship that goes on among the parties there. In one of the articles that we wrote in Business Law Today was an article about the logic of considering an executive committee. And that is of developing a group that is meeting, rather than the CEO out there on his or her own, making decisions, that you've got this executive committee that's interacting with the CEO and a couple of other people. More than likely, one of those other people is going to be the lawyer, the general counsel, or if it's outside counsel, that key person, and perhaps the CFO or others, but where the board stays in touch with what is going on, just like we would if we owned that company, whatever it is, because we wouldn't do it. We couldn't even think about doing it in any other way. So that article, which was chosen by Business Law Today that year that it was published as one of the top 5 in its category, not because we're wizards, but only because we're addressing an issue that people realize needs to be addressed. Excuse me. When we turn to ethics, let's see what we got. Yeah. Here's another thing. Okay. And we can all say this sort of with a little smile. People up there and they're saying, man, live ethically, work ethically, you know, all right, that's great. All right. But that's not enough. And most people know, yeah, you tell me that, but if I don't do what my boss says, what he or she says, I'm going to lose my job, etc. If you're going to have a successful ethics program, you've got to have not only encourage everyone to live and work ethically, you've got to support them, and you've got to deter those who would end run the situation. We've had this in place for a long time, what we referred to here, ESD, long before there was ESG, which is going through a lot of change. This is not going to change. If you're going to be successful in an ethics program, sure, you've got to encourage everyone to live and work ethically, but you've got to support the people that want to do it right and deter those who want to get off the track. The business lawyer is a critical link in this. Again, they're not there with a wand saying, I've got the answers, this is how we're going to organize, but saying we have to do this. We have to step in here and we have to make sure, yes, that we're encouraging everyone, but that we are supporting those who want to do it right. And we're going to deter the heck out of those people who might think they can in-run the situation. Board support's needed in there, but again, the business lawyer can make that point to the board that we've got to think about this. We've got to be looking at these things and not sitting on our hands. And it goes back to not only, I mean, things that are just way out of bounds, like the Me Too thing that we saw happen over the last 2 decades when this surfaced. Not that it hasn't been around a long time, but that's a board problem. Although the business lawyer and the board can be, all right, are we making it clear those things don't happen here? Further, and an even more common problem is that what I would call earnings manipulation, that a single person, if they're in charge of an operation, can say, you know, another penny or two on the earnings per share would really help us. And they turn to the CFO or the chief accounting officer, can you find an extra penny for me, whatever? Well, maybe if the controls are set up where everybody knows that each quarter the board, be it the audit committee or whatever committee, is meeting with people in the finance group, and they're saying, all right, let's just go over everything. We all trust everybody, but let's just talk. We have a list of things that we want to know what happened. Have you had any conversations? People come to you and talked about how earnings might be increased or what we might do in different areas to reduce our exposures there. And so things that would be out of bounds. Those are powerful deterrents, and they're straight up. In other words, nobody's saying, I don't trust Stephen, he's the CEO, and I don't trust. No, we're just running things in the manner in which they should be run. A great example, I'll try to go through this quickly. Great example of what I would call ethical behavior happened when I was actually a PhD student at the University of Houston. Our exam, we had to read a particular article Paul Samuelson wrote, one of the great economists and stuff, and I read it, and I've been schooled carefully on this. I thought Samuelson was perhaps wrong, but I say I was schooled carefully. The people at Lamar, at Chicago, and at Houston said, okay, anybody can be wrong, but be very careful before you say someone is wrong. Look at the thing hard. Anyhow, what happened was I put together an article, and there was the faculty of the University of Houston. There was a lot of the interest in this, of whether Samuelson erred in this particular article, not like the end of the world, but these points. And I involved a professor that I'd had at the University of Chicago, who was actually later on a Nobel Prize winner himself early on in that. That was all just beginning to happen. Samuelson was the first American to get the Nobel. And he said, yeah, you're correct. But I sent it to the University of Chicago. They had a journal of political economy. And the editor, who was a young guy who later on himself got the Nobel Prize, circulated it. And, people would say, oh, well, you know, Chicago and Harvard, MIT would say, they're all in different planets. They never talk. They talk all the time. And they respect each other. And they share thoughts. Anyhow, one of another outstanding professor at Chicago wrote to the editor, said, yeah, Grace is right. I told Samuelson this when I viewed an earlier draft. Again, nobody's lashing out. This was respectful conversation that was going on here. And when you saw, and they said, look, we don't want to publish it to JPE. It looks like we're making, digging in for a fight. Send it to Harvard, to the Journal of Political Economy. To the Quarterly Journal of Economics, and see what they do with it. I sent it to them. And Robert Dorfman, who is a close associate of a tremendous economist himself with Samuelson, writes back and says, Samuelson has agreed, and he said very carefully, he said, extended somewhat your arguments. I mean, what great dialogue. Forget that here I'm a kid, But to see this taking place between people with different views, but all respectful of each other, it was a great experience to see that. That's the kind of dialogue that we need that can work really effectively. What's the timing on this thing? 4:20. Out of 4:25. Okay. The real quickly, let me comment on the situation with regard to pro bono agreements, because as one of the things, and boy, business lawyers are in the middle of that in a big way. Let's see what I got here. Yeah, that was the Quarterly Journal of Economics where my note was published with Samuelson. But here in there, some of you will recall these names right above that in the discussion. Milton Friedman and James Tobin were having an exchange. Two of the very top, if not the top, monetary economists in the world. And then here's Samuelson. Who in the world is this guy Grace? Coming from the University of Houston and a youngster. But this is people who were looking at things, the merits of things, and handled it so well. It was just a great experience for me. Now, when you come to this thing with regard to these pro bono agreements, we had an assignment that I think just flies in the face of these concepts. We all know what the deal is. 4 law firms got hit, or 5 law firms got hit with the executive orders from the president and so forth. 4 of them fought, and they've all prevailed so far with regard to, I think, even being awarded permanent injunctions by the courts. It's going to be, I guess they'll all go to the Supreme Court. But anyhow, all these firms entered in these pro bono agreements. And we had a case. It was, supposedly with this pro bono agreement, they're going to do work for the government for free, but then they can pursue their client base, even if that client base is opposite the government. And in a real quick summary, what happened was a bank came to us and they were being sued by a state retirement system for mismanagement. Bank brought us in, and the bank felt like they were sued for $200 million. And their insurance company, which was one of the top carriers, said, yeah, it's going to take $100 million for us to settle this thing. They brought us in, we looked at it, and we showed where the source of the problems, not that the bank didn't do some things less than the best, but the real source of the problem was with the state retirement system. And so in the last paragraph there, the Associate General Counsel litigation wrote this, we analyzed and refuted potentially serious allegation demonstrated did not cause. The result was the bank was the only defendant in only 25 cases not to ask to pay, even though the bank was a single party that could have made the plaintiffs whole. That the situation there was that if we had that kind of an agreement with the state, this is the point we're making, the state, and we had some sort of pro bono, we're going to do this work for you, but we can go pursue a client or work for a client that takes $200 million out of your pocket, that's going to be okay. I think that's very, paradoxically a real problem. So we'll see where those go. And we know that the ABA has sued the executive, the entire executive branch on this thing. And I think Sussman Godfrey I know that Sussman Godfrey is representing them in this thing. Okay, so in summary here, I tried to throw out a lot, but what we're addressing is the business lawyer. Business lawyer has a major role in all these things, not as a wizard that's got all the answers in his or her back pocket, but to raise the issues. And this thing, with raising the issues, not feeling compelled to provide answers, but leading the organization in focusing on issues. Governance is about issues. It's not about best practices because they aren't any. They're different for everybody at every point in time, literally. But it's about the issues, and you need to address them. Business lawyer plays a big role in all of that. Anyhow, that concludes my remarks. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Grace. Appreciate it. Why don't we call the other panelists back so we can have a roundtable discussion? See Professor Gratz, Professor Kanaki Jefferson. So thank you all. That was a really interesting conversation and discussion about how lawyers lead. It really was very, very interesting and helpful. But I want to get drilled down a little bit deeper because I know that I think for our audience, it was one of the questions was basically how do we find out how to lead? And so what I want to know, like, what does it mean to lead? I mean, so I know Professor Gratz said, well, you know, you have to lead yourself. If you lead yourself, then you can lead others. Professor Kanaki Jefferson said, well, you know, sometimes it's like looking at biographies of what others do. And Dr. Grace was talking about, you know, sort of how lawyers are, you know, resolve matters and they raise issues and those sorts of things. So, but, you know, from a practical standpoint, what does it mean to lead? The lead sounds so like there's like a handbook or something. We know about great leaders, Abraham Lincoln or FDR or whatever. But what does it mean to lead on a day-to-day basis as a lawyer, do you think?
I'll jump in.
Okay, great.
Yeah, to lead is to have a relationship with somebody where they trust you and put their faith in you. It could, you lead when you counsel somebody and, you know, focus on, as a lawyer, we have an obligation to provide legal advice, and we're in the service industry. Well, if someone doesn't want our advice, if someone doesn't want our services, we've lost the title may say lawyer, but are we truly serving the legal function, the legal profession? And so the way to be an effective lawyer, I would argue, is the same way to be an effective leader. Building a trusting relationship, showing that you're collaborative, demonstrating your expertise, and being credible. You check all those boxes, you're not only going to be an effective leader, you're going to be an effective lawyer, you're going to be an effective leader. And so to me, it's two sides of the same coin.
And
Kanaki Jefferson.
I'll pick up on that. And my response won't surprise anyone given my opening remarks. I think to lead is to mentor, and to lead is to think about not only how you're doing your job competently, whatever your role may be, but who will be stepping into your role next, and how are you both creating structures within your role to facilitate their ability to be in the pipeline, and importantly, how are you mentoring, nurturing, and building relationships with those who will eventually replace us, which is sometimes a really difficult thing to accept as a leader. But the real hallmark of success, in my mind, in leadership is the legacy you bring along to fill the role that you currently have, whether you move on to a new role and someone else can step in to take your place.
Dr. Grace, any thoughts?
Yes, right along the line, following their good thoughts, that I really like the concept, and I think the door is very open for that lawyer to raise issues, and that there is every reason for issues to be addressed, not proclaiming that they've got an answer or those things like that, but that they are well positioned to raise issues that need to be addressed. And the person who can lead us in those types of things, help remind us of the issues we have to address, I think is playing an important leadership role. Just put it that way.
So it's interesting. I mean, I think when in popular culture, when we think of leaders, we think of Moses and bringing his people out of the dead. I mean, it's just so interesting. But what I hear, and I think maybe our audience might be surprised, that it's the relationship, because when we depict these great leaders, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, FDR, Teddy Roosevelt, Moses, etc. I mean, we see them as like, everybody's following them. But what you're basically telling us, all of you, I think to some extent, is that it is their relationship that's the most important. That's why people followed them, not because they ended up being great leaders in and of themselves, because people trusted them. I think that's very, very important for us to know. And I think Dr. Ray is saying sort of the same thing, is that the lawyers are able to bring up the issues are important. And because they're able to do that, people follow them and trust them in terms of a judgment. So how do lawyers learn to lead? I think that was one of the questions in the Q&A. It was like, well, how do we learn to do that? And so I know, Professor Kanaki, you said, you read like biographies of people, and that's really helpful. And Professor Gratz talked about how, you look at yourself, you look at other people, maybe you judge yourself at how other people that you like, how you respond to them to leading. But, in a practical standpoint, is there a manual? Is there a book? I guess Kanaki Jefferson has the book, as well as Gratz has materials and whatever. Is that where people who are interested in becoming better leaders, how do they learn that? Kanaki Jeff, sounds like you want to go first.
Oh, sure, I can jump in. Well, I think that's part of it, but I also don't think that you can just learn to lead by reading about it. And so that's really where I feel like Professor Gratz's comments were well taken, in that he talked about you can't lead others unless you're able to effectively lead yourself. And that's certainly where it starts. But I also think that regularly immersing yourself in both literature on leadership and reading about examples of leaders is an important way to engage in that self-development. So I think it's a both and.
Okay. Professor Gratz and
Yes, no,
Dr. Gratz.
understanding one size doesn't fit all, I think, is an important point on learning to be a leader. Even the leaders you mentioned, Lincoln, Moses, Martin Luther King, all three different leaders, all three different leadership styles, all three, I think one would argue, very effective. All three are effective leaders, but in a different way. So not only reading biographies and autobiographies, but why observing people. You will be surrounded by leaders who you want to emulate, and certainly leaders that you do not want to emulate one bit. And so understanding the traits, styles, actions folks take that you like and dislike, and how they fit with your personality is important. One thing maybe none of us mentioned, but I think all of us would agree on, is authentic leadership. Don't fake it till you make it, but actually know who you are and know your strengths and understand what is natural to you. Because if you try to do something that's not natural, people can see through that very quickly.
Dr. Grace, any thoughts?
Yes, I think that I certainly agree that people are going to read right through someone, and that when it's the Moses, Lincoln, Martin Luther King trio, what they did was, again, they identified concerns and issues in an effective manner. Brought those forward and that's again along the lines of the business lawyers can be bringing those types of concepts forward to look at these situations, raising things that need to be addressed, not just setting out, here's how we're going to do it, but pulling the group together. And they're positioned to do that, and they don't need to feel compelled to try to give an answer to stuff as relative to identifying the issues that need to be addressed. I don't want to be hung up on this concept, excuse me, of issues and stuff. We've just seen so much of it that, and the lawyers, and again, I think even the ABA with regard to the book, that's what they're looking at, as a tool that lets the lawyer bring these things up without being in somebody's face, so to speak,
Yeah. So do you think that, do you think the lawyer's responsibility differs in leadership depending upon his or her role? So for instance, if you're a lawyer in different companies or different organizations, or if you're a junior lawyer versus a senior lawyer, or you're in litigation or arbitration versus a lawyer's head of an organization. And I guess I'd frame all of this as, does the culture of your institution also play a role in your leadership? Can people really lead the same way? I mean, you want to be authentic, you want to have relationships, but depending upon your role or your institution, would that vary from place to place? Maybe you're not the right leader for a particular organization or in a particular space that you're in. So,
Yeah.
good.
Sorry. No, I'm smiling because I 100% agree with that.
Mhm.
So your leadership style is not going to be appropriate for every culture and for every problem. And frankly, companies and cultures evolve. You may thrive 1 year and then 5 years down the road, as the company or your setting has gone in a different direction, you're withering on the vine. It's something I saw on the internet, and I'm repeating it now over and over because I just think it has a lot of merit. You can be a perfectly wrapped gift, but delivered to the wrong place. And I think it it resonates with me because your leadership style is unique to you, and some cultures will embrace it and some will reject it. And you've got to figure out very quickly, where will you thrive? And if you're not thriving at a place, no disrespect to you, no disrespect to the culture you're working in, it may be time for you to move on.
Professor Kanaka Jefferson, or any other thoughts? Or that's a great, Dr. Grace.
Sure, I would just echo that. And I think it goes to my larger point of why it's so important in a leadership role to be thinking about who comes along next, right? That's thinking about the succession planning, and not just who comes along next to take your role, but also thinking about your own trajectory and how you build and develop it.
Great.
Well, just
Dr.
as
Grace?
Professor Jefferson is saying, right, you really need to, an organization needs to nurture, needs to build successorship, and needs to build multiple people who can help address the various challenges to the organization. That's an important part of that. And as Andrew was mentioning too, about if it's a situation where someone just doesn't fit for whatever reasons, those things happen. I mean, goodness knows, we know, all the way from the top on down, the CEO on down, that there's a lot of turnover in those jobs. Not that people are incompetent or criminal or whatever, anything like that. It's just that they don't fit in that particular situation. And so you have to be reading that. The individual needs to be looking at the situation and saying, do I fit? Do I fit here, or would I perhaps be better off somewhere else? That's an ongoing challenge.
Right. And one of the things that the audience members ask, and I also ask, is like, does it matter, whether you're junior or senior? Does it matter what your background is, male or female? Does the leadership change, do you think, based on who you are? And because I think you all talked about identity and who your identity is. You have to know yourself. I think Professor Gratz said, how well do you need to know yourself? And does that play a role in how you are leading in a particular organization?
Yes. Knowing yourself and knowing the challenges you've overcome has a profound impact on how you lead. If you came from a background where you had to work, 3 jobs, or had to support your family, or the first person in your family to go to college, those challenges matter. Those challenges guide your leadership style and, frankly, your empathy. I talked earlier about knowing yourself. Knowing yourself is also knowing the challenges you've overcome, and hopefully through those trials and tribulations, learned how to be empathetic to others. When someone is going through a similar challenge, understanding what he or she is going through, and extending a helping hand. That's leadership as well. Extending a hand and being patient and appreciative when someone is not at their best. And we all have those moments. And that understanding, I think, is a key to being an effective leader.
Any thoughts, Professor Kanaka Jefferson or Dr. Grace?
Yeah.
Or I'll just say
Okay.
quickly, I think another component of what you're getting at is leadership opportunities may not be equally available if you are more junior, or if you're from a different background, someone that hasn't traditionally held that role. In my research, of course, it was women who had never been on the Supreme Court before, and they wanted to be on the Supreme Court, right? And so I think an important aspect of leadership is to help reform both formal structures and informal structures so that equally qualified individuals can be fully considered for leadership opportunities. Sometimes that's something as simple as changing when a meeting time occurs. It can be larger, changing the process of selection and vetting leaders from a sort of behind closed doors who's come up through a particular behind the scenes sort of trajectory versus making the selection process widely known and having a group who is overseeing the selection process, also reflecting the wide range of individuals in the public served. So I think there are structural changes that can be put into place that allow for a broader range of individuals who have developed the leadership capabilities to then step forward into pipelines that were previously closed to them.
Right. Dr. Grace?
Yes, it made me stop and think about our own organization, the 30, like say, guys and gals that comprise it. Because we always we kind of laugh about our group. It's like if you still got something to prove, you probably don't want to be in this group. It's not the right place for you. People in the group, we're looking at complex issues, and people say, okay, here are my ideas. No, wait, I like your idea better than mine. There's no propriety, we're looking for that group is, but we're free of all that. I mean, it's that contrast by the nature of our organization. Everybody is basically a 1099 that comes in on projects and works on things. But it's such a, they're there after one thing. They know how to work, and they're after the issue, whatever the issues are. It's an interesting contrast to what we've all faced, going through the organizational things. I just throw it out there because it probably explains a good bit of, why we've been fortunate to be as successful as we have, is that combined thinking type of thing, But going back to the careers, I think all of the points that are being raised are absolutely critical. How you bring people along, how you help them grow and give them decision-making opportunities, and that people also can see their opportunities to raise their thoughts in an effective manner, whatever that is in the particular situation at that point in time. Oftentimes that isn't necessarily having or the answer, maybe raising an answer or options for answers, as a way, especially when you're younger, to be able to open that door. And what do we all recognize? We say that guy and that gal are pretty good thinkers. They're pretty good thinkers. Just again, throwing some of those things out there.
Great, thank you. What about your leadership in terms of how it changes versus your obligation to your organization versus your obligation to society? So for instance, let's say you're on a board of directors or you're general counsel of a major oil company that has an unprecedented spill in the Gulf. What do you look at? What do you examine to make determinations of how you should lead and help your board lead through that situation? Because on one hand, I would imagine your principal responsibility at first is obviously to your organization to make sure that you protect its fiscal and legal challenges. But on the other hand, if the spill gets bigger and longer or whatever, then do you have a lot different obligation to society at large as opposed to just your organization? So how would you advise, if you're in that situation, how would you advise your client or your board in those circumstances?
Yeah. Those are tough issues. They're real. They're real and they're tough. That's where, again, I think the structure of the organization, where it says, okay, we're going to face whatever's happened in the proper manner. And that's easy to say. It's a challenge to do that in different situations, but where you've got a framework where people feel like they can okay, this is not so good for us as the ABC company, but it's closer to the truth, whatever that may be. And the truth can be, can be less than defined in a lot of situations as we're trying to figure out what happens. But to have that where there is the ability for people to interact and look at this, and having the right people, and the lawyers are certainly in the middle of these things, is important, as opposed to something that is shut down and one person's making all the decisions. I think you put yourself at major risk when you're doing that, and you're missing out on the factors, Dean, that you're raising, the broader range of factors that needs to be looked at in problematic situations.
Any other thoughts?
Well,
Or-
the legal
go ahead.
ethics, the legal ethics
please.
scholar in me, I
Yeah.
can't help but mention that the model rules do give, and the Texas rules do give a little bit of guidance, at least to the extent, we spin your hypothetical out a little bit. If there is, criminal or unlawful behavior that's going to impact the finances of the organization, there's an obligation in the professional conduct rules of the lawyer to report up the chain, right? And then the ABA model rules and the Texas rules are a little bit different in terms of what happens if a lawyer feels they need to report out of the organization because the organization isn't responding even at the highest level in the way the lawyer believes should be done. The model rules provide an exception in that sort of extreme circumstance to the duty of confidentiality. The Texas rules would still obligate a lawyer to go back to the confidentiality rule in Texas. That's Rule 1.05, and you'd have to find an exception there to your confidentiality obligations. And so, in a very extreme situation, a lawyer's leadership, because of the special obligations that we have as lawyers, could require a lawyer to step aside or step down or withdraw from a matter. That's an extreme scenario, but again, the professional responsibility professor in me can't help but spin your hypothetical out just a little bit farther, Dean Baines, and make that point.
Mr. Gratz.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if it's an extreme scenario. Look, we're in the advice, counsel, and advocacy business. And so our job is to be a zealous advocate for our clients within the confines of the model rules and the confines of the law. And if those two can't gel, your license isn't worth any job. And you look to the model rules, you look to your ethical compass and decide what to do. From a practical standpoint, live below your means. And I say that only in half jest. All of us need to be prepared as advocates and as individuals who have taken an oath to move on if a company is not acting within the law and in compliance with our views. Now, you're not going to always agree with your client. That doesn't mean they're unethical. People have the right to disagree, and your client may go in a different direction. But if you're in an extreme situation where your client is taking action and wants you to advocate for such action that goes against the law, that puts people at risk, that is inconsistent with the model rules, you have an obligation to move on. And knowing that you don't have golden handcuffs that keep you there is a liberating feeling.
So this kind of related to one of the questions from the audience is like, well, what if you're working for a really bad leader? In essence, what the question asks. What do you do in those circumstances when you have a really bad leader you're working, or is the person's perceiving the person as a really bad leader? What do you do? Is that when you leave? What do you do in those circumstances in terms of advice for one of the members of the audience? Any takers? I see. See a lot of faces.
Yeah, I'll just chime in quickly. There's a difference between bad and unethical. So I don't want the participant to confuse what I said with bad. Only he or she knows if the practice is unethical. So for purposes of this conversation, I'll assume they're just a leader that doesn't
ineffective. Yes,
ineffective. Doesn't conform. Is not the leader he or she wants
Absolutely.
to be managed by. I think you have a candid conversation of what can I do to work better with you? It doesn't have to be confrontational, it doesn't have to be adversarial. It can be a professional conversation of, frankly, if you don't think he or she is a good leader, he or she may not have a positive opinion of you either. It's usually a symmetrical
Mutual.
relationship, mutual symmetrical relationship. And so having a conversation of how can we work better together would probably be very well received, and not just working in a vacuum. Having that conversation, trying to develop a positive working relationship, give it time, and after a reasonable amount of time, if it's simply not working, we go back to what all of us discussed earlier of maybe you're not the right fit, no fault of yours or your managers for that organization.
Any other thoughts?
I'll just quickly say, I think this also touches on the aspect of, as a leader, making sure that you are mindful of your well-being. And we as a profession are not great at that. But I know here at the Law Center, we are trying to do better in inculcating that in our students, that an important part of being a professional is also taking steps to protect your well-being. And that means having a way that you find meaning and purpose outside of the workplace and outside of how you might be defined or the relationship you might have with the person that's leading the organization. So I think that's an important component too, that allows someone to sustain a situation that might not be ideal. I really like the idea of having a frank conversation. I think that that's terrific. And I also think that if that's not working, if you are focusing on your well-being, you can sustain a difficult situation long enough to think about where you might want to move next and what might be next for you in your own trajectory.
In most of the firms today, their key intellectual property is their employees, or in many of them, that's the case. And we think it's important that intellectual property be protected. We talk about that in the book, and the business lawyer, again, can be in the middle of that. Is it the Uber type situation that happened? Is it the Miramax situation and the split, with Disney, when we personally think Disney realized this and said, this is not our cup of tea, we're out of here, and split with them. But that the company, and the business lawyer is in a key position of saying, we're off the track here, and it's going to cost us where we cannot afford it. And that's in terms of our people, because people are mobile today. That's good. And they will move for non-monetary reasons as well as monetary. Economics teaches that. You've got the monetary and the non-monetary economic factors that are at work there and those things. And we should, in organizations, be pushing to run them in a manner that where we are concerned about the protection of our intellectual property in a proper manner.
Thank you. So we talked also about the spill in the Gulf. How would the messaging, as a leader, you have to be involved in messaging of these high-risk, challenging circumstances, crisis situations, and how would the messaging change depending upon speaking to the board, the shareholders, the press, the employees? How might you see the messaging change? And do you have to be concerned about as a lawyer with what the messaging actually says? Professor Gratz, looks like you're ready to go.
Oh, no. Yeah, the answer is yes. Messaging matters, especially in a crisis situation. You need to, as lawyers, we see risk everywhere, and we try to clamp down on it everywhere. It's like sort of the whack-a-mole on risk. Unfortunately, sometimes our aversion to risk shortchanges the organization. If there's a crisis, you talked about oil spill, explosions, lots of bad things happen for our clients. And the public wants to know what's going on. The public wants to know if their loved ones are safe. And you know what? They have a right to know that. They have the right to know more information that I think sometimes lawyers are willing to give, because lawyers are thinking about what's going to be in the deposition, what's going to be in the briefing. You got to balance that out. And you maybe sometimes have to squash the lawyer in you and think of the human in you and think long term of in terms of shareholder value, in terms of reputation in the community, in terms of being a human being. Sometimes you want to get out there first and communicate. Now you want to be thoughtful and that what you're sharing is accurate and not speculation, but the depositions and the trials and all that can wait. Sometimes you just need to share what's going on so the community and the organization feels better and feels like the right leadership is guiding the ship.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from Dr. Grace or Professor Kanaka?
I agree. I think that that the business lawyer can be one that can be thoughtful about, do we have the right team together working on this situation? That we're responding to the evolution of things as they occur, I think. And the business lawyer can be thoughtful about that without feeling they have to, again, answer all questions. Not at all. Let's put that team together and let them work on it in a way that we can all believe is appropriate, or get as close to all of us believing it's appropriate.
And I would just add that I think it also depends on your role. So we've been talking about lawyers as leaders, which often means that lawyers aren't lawyering, right? Lawyer as the CEO, lawyer as the university president. And in that context, your messaging would be very different than it would be if you were the general counsel or the lawyer for the occasion. And I think that it's important when lawyers step out of their lawyering role and into a different kind of leadership role to two things. One, every good lawyer knows that you don't want to be your own lawyer. So even though you are a lawyer, if you are leading the organization, you want a good lawyer and legal counsel to rely upon. But then also to recognize, as Andrew said, that you might need to leave your lawyering side behind a little bit or balance it out for the role that you hold that's communicating to the organization or with the organization and its constituents.
And I think it's also important to remember that the lawyer provides options, but the business people, whether it's a lawyer or not a lawyer, he or she's the one who makes actually the ultimate decisions. And they are supposed to look at the whole array of things. And really good lawyers, I think, look at a whole array of things and giving advice. I think what clients don't like lawyers who are often negative and say, no, 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 no. They often want some sort of resolution of something in some way. And I think it's always important to keep that in mind. And they want to find ways around whatever the situation may be if there's a blockage or something, to the extent there is one. But last question, as we're running out of time. What advice would you give to lawyers if they are presented with opportunity to head an organization, as compared to serving in a legal role? So related to what Professor Kanaka Jefferson just said, what if you're presented the opportunity? How would you prepare for it? Obviously, if you're presented with the opportunity, people must have trust and faith in you, as Professor Gratt said. They must, you may have been mentoring people, whatever, so you have fans or whatever. Nobody became a leader just because they had a staff and they go part of the Great Sea or Red Sea or whatever. I mean, they were chosen as leaders because people respected them and trusted them. So obviously you're in a position where somebody respects and trusts you, but then how do you make sure that you transition from that role, being maybe the lawyer, to being actually the actual organizational head? What advice in like 2 or 3 steps, I know it's more than that, would you give our audience in terms of thinking about what would you do to prepare for taking on that role that's a non-lawyer role, but an organizational director, head, president, CEO, whatever? Any thoughts?
Well, my advice is just to envision yourself doing that. I think, especially for my law students that take my leadership course, they still think about themselves, well, I'm going to be practicing law. I'm going to be the general counsel. I'm going to be, and I think visualizing and realizing that there is an extraordinary opportunity because of our training as lawyers to not just counsel the leaders of the organization, but to be the leaders. And this to me is, now more than ever is incredibly important. It really goes back to my initial comments about the lawyer's role as public citizen, the lawyer's role as public leader. is how I would advise someone to start, is thinking of themselves as that should be their role as a lawyer.
Three things.
I agree. I
Go ahead.
mean, oh, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I agree that the lawyer can have a perspective that's got a good bit of width to it in addition to depth. And from seeing things and having had to deal with them, and they can be pretty thoughtful in many cases about, we got to consider this collection of factors here and help in the leadership role, make sure those are addressed. So it's not bad training for the skill sets that you'd bring into a sort of organization leadership position.
Mr. Gretz.
First 30 days, know yourself, know the organization, and know your team. Understand and appreciate what role your organization and your team has, and then learn your team. And that's simply sitting down with each member, getting to know them, getting to know how long they've been there, what are their likes, what are their dislikes, what are their strengths, what are their blind spots. I mean, if you're going to lead a team, you need to know the team. And that to me is something you got to focus on within the first 30 days.
And I would answer the question is, one, trust your instincts. And two is that people chose you for that, so there must be a reason. So believe in yourself that that's why they chose you. And three is that everyone needs mentors, not just the people that you're mentoring, but others. And mentors can be from below and above. And you can learn from everyone, whether they're higher than you or in status or position or lower than you, that you can find traits in everyone that you like, that you say, oh, that's really cool. That's really interesting how they did that. I'd like to see if I can do that as well, no matter whether they're your boss or they're somebody who actually works for you.
Absolutely.
But we're out of time. This has been great. Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for our audience at home or your office or wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. We're love to have you participate again in our CLEs. We have them regularly. Hats off to Christina Van Arsdale, who organized this, and Sandra Tennessee, who also is very involved in this. Everyone else, they do a fabulous job with our CLEs. So thank you so much.